There we go. Now I think we got it. So let's talk about the formal amendment process. And I'm going to cut this down just a little bit. The formal amendment process, according to the Constitution, actually has 4 methods that we could amend the Constitution. So my notes have all 4 of those. If you want to read through all of them, you're welcome to. I'm just going to touch base on the major ways that they are amended. This first one is the most important, and so I'm going to spend the most time here on this one, and this is the one I'm really concerned that you know. The Constitution is difficult to amend on purpose, and it must, because we're a federalist type government, it must require cooperation of both the states and the national government. We don't want a process where we can eliminate one and therefore change our Constitution, create a new amendment without the consent of the other. So in the most common way, and the, I guess, simplest way, if there is one, is where we involve Congress and then the state legislators. So we begin with 2/3 of the House and Senate pass a proposal to amend the Constitution. So you've got to involve all of the 535 members of Congress. And depending upon where it originated, if it started in the House or started in the Senate, then it's going to pass the other side, and it's got to have 2/3 of everybody together. So once it's proposed by the House and the Senate, then it goes on to the states, and every state will conduct their own review process, questions, answers, and then they will eventually get to the point where they can vote whether or not to ratify this. So if this were to happen, it would come to our state, they would discuss it. Sometimes the state will put out a referendum to its people, and the people will then vote yes or no on that amendment. Most of the time, the congressional members of the state will make the decision, but it's not this has only happened 27 times, actually, to be fair, 17 since the Bill of Rights. And so I'm not sure exactly how all those states would handle it today if we were to get to this point. But we've not had too many opportunities there. But you have to have 3/4 of the states agree to ratify and approve that amendment. And if that happens, then we have changed the Constitution and we have been successful. So that is the simplest way it can happen. But among all of that, there's all kinds of debate and arguing whether we should change it. There's the loose interpretation of the Constitution. There's a strict interpretation. There will be lots and lots of discussion before it all is said and done. 26 out of 27 amendments have been done this way. So that's why I say this is the most important, because it's the most common and relatively straightforward. The other method that I think is worth us talking about and noting here is bringing up the idea of conventions. So this one here begins the same way, where the House and the Senate pass it through the 2/3 majority. They send it off to the states. And instead of the state congressional members making the decision here, they're going to elect special people from the state that are then going to make this decision, and that is called a state convention. And those special people who are elected are called delegates. And they will do the debating process. They will check out all the ins and outs of what are the ramifications of this, and then they will vote whether or not the state of Indiana approves this amendment. And to my knowledge, you can correct me if you find this elsewhere, but to my knowledge, there's nothing stating that it has to be a specific individual, so that nothing says you can't choose a representative who's already serving in the state house. Nothing says you cannot choose a former senator or something like that. As far as I know, as long as they're elected, it can be just about anybody that's part of that special convention. One amendment has been approved this way, and that was the 21st Amendment. 21st Amendment tells us what? Just a little foreshadowing here to what we're going to be learning, going over. Yeah. Okay, we'll get there. 21st Amendment repeals prohibition. So there were enough people that felt strongly enough about this one that they wanted to do state conventions instead of doing it through the state legislature. And so this one was done that way. So this is the only two ways that it's actually been accomplished. There are two additional ways our Constitution allows for the amendment process to happen, and these other two, because they've never been used, I'll let you kind of dig on your own if you want to. I am not going to be real concerned that you are very knowledgeable in these other two methods. So you can do a national convention along with the state legislature, so it's kind of flip-flopping option 2 here. That's never actually been accomplished, and again, I'm going to slide past these, so these slides are on Canvas if you really want them, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Or you can do the national convention, state convention, hybrid option there, which again, I am not going to be real concerned that you spend a lot of time, if any, reviewing through those last two. This is a key thing, though. The president cannot be involved in the amendment process. He has no role in it. Now, he could go out and he could give speeches on it, but he can't vote. He really can't even write up an amendment. He has to go through Congress for that to happen. And David?
What would happen for a national convention if the people elected him as a delegate? If he's not allowed to be, he's not allowed to have a role in the
So because of that, I don't think that you could elect the president to be a delegate. I'm just answering off the top of my head. I'd probably have to do a little bit of research or talk to a constitutional law professor and find out why exactly that is, but I don't think the president would be allowed to vote in as a delegate for one of these conventions, just because it would be a conflict of interest, and therefore then merging the separation of powers issue, and I don't think you could do that. Well, that's a good question and good thought there. According to the Constitution, there is no time limit that is specified for the expiration of an amendment once it's been proposed. So it could have a shelf life of forever. Most amendments, however, they have started to put expiration dates on, and generally they settle on a 7-year time limit. I think I don't know if I showed the video or if it was just something that I was watching, reading. But there was that the 27th Amendment was actually sitting on the shelf since the 1790s. And it had just been sitting there, and nobody ever ratified it, nobody ever sent it through. And then finally in 1992, it passed through. Today, if they're writing up an amendment, typically they're going to have a 7-year time limit, just because of the fact that if it goes more than 7 years and it can't get through, then it's probably not something that people really want. And generally speaking, after 7 years, you're going to have a whole new Congress anyway. So they don't want that just sitting, hanging out there. Now, a couple things to note on limitations of amendments. You cannot make an amendment that would prohibit states from having equal representation in the Senate. Just can't do it. That was part of the Connecticut Compromise, and because that was a foundational principle in the Constitution, that one's never going to fly, unless for some reason some state agreed to it, and they said, yeah, we'll take a hit on that. We'll go down to one senator. No state's going to do that. The whole process here is difficult on purpose, because we don't want our Constitution changing all the time. The video mentioned a couple other nations that they change their Constitution frequently, and it's just a revolving door of new laws and new changes, and I'm not sure how I'd handle teaching a government class in one of those nations where you've got 147 amendments to their original Constitution. I can handle 27. I think we can handle 27. So I think it's a good thing. It can be frustrating at times, but I think there's a lot of safeguards in there.